Hello, ladies and gentlemen. In this episode of our app development series, the concept we're going to focus on is navigating to other pages and passing data through that navigation. Before we begin, I wanted to mention some changes that I made off screen in case you're following along with the videos. The largest change that I made was I changed our getGameData function from using the boxscore.json file to the linescore.json file. The reason I made this change is because I was doing a little bit more testing and I noticed that not all games have a boxscore.json file, particularly games that have not happened yet, like games that occur in the future, but most of the game directories do have a linescore.json file. And it has basically the same data, only it has different property names, so I needed to adjust my variables to use the new property names. I also added some error handling in our fetch, just in case the linescore.json file doesn't exist. At the bottom of the fetch, I added a .catch statement, which returns or just prints out an error if that file doesn't exist. Some other minor changes that I made are in the game screen, I filtered out any null data because in our API, if we get the file but some of the data doesn't exist, then we return null. So what I'm doing now is I'm filtering that out whenever we receive that data so we don't try to display a null item. And finally, I made a slight visual change to our date bar. I just added a gray background and bolded the text. And if you want to see any of that code, you can check it out on the GitHub page. What I'd like to do now is add a link to the subtitle section of our games that goes to a new page which will show videos for each game. And that was actually the original goal of the app altogether, was to be able to view the videos for each game without having to watch a 15-second ad for each one. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into my screens directory and create a new file, and I'll call this videos screen.js. And we'll add the basic React stuff, so we will import React from React. Let's also import view, text, and style sheet from React Native. And then we'll export default class videos screen, which extends a React.component. And down at the bottom, we will create a style. So we'll say const styles equals style sheet dot create. And we'll leave that blank for now, but we'll fill that in later. And every component is required to have a render method. So let's create a temporary render method here, which will just return a text element that says videos screen. All right, now we will go into the navigation folder and open up our main tab navigator. And here we'll need to import the videos screen. So I'm going to put this beneath the game screen since we'll be accessing it from the game screen. So I'll say import videos screen from screens/videos screen. Now we need to add the video screen to our stack. And since we're accessing it from the games screen, we'll add it to the game stack. So here's where we create the stack navigator. And now we can add a new screen and we'll call it videos. And we'll give it the value of videos screen. Now we should be able to navigate to the video screen from the game screen. So let's go into our game screen and let's update the subtitle component to have a link to the video screen. So I'm going to scroll down to our render subtitle function here. Let me collapse some of this to get out of the way. And right now we're just displaying the text subtitle, but what we want to do is put a link. So let's actually go back up to the top and let's import button from React Native. And in the render subtitle now, we will put a button here with a title of Go to Videos. And the on press will be this.on videos press, which we will implement right here. On videos press. And we'll go ahead and delete the subtitle text there. Finally, to navigate to the videos screen, all we need to do is use the navigation property. So we'll say this.props.navigation.navigate, and we give the name of the video screen, which was defined in our main tab navigator right here. So it should be videos not video screen, but you can name it whatever you'd like right here. So I'll say videos, and we will save and refresh and see if that works. Okay, I'll click Go to Videos, and as you can see, we have navigated to the video screen. There should be a back button there. I'm not sure why it's not showing up, but when we click on that, it goes back to the game screen. And I also noticed a slight issue, which is when it's collapsed, we can still kind of see the button there, so we'll have to address that as well. Let's go into our API file and create a new function here for gathering the video data. So I'm going to create a function called getVideoData, and this will also take a game URL and will return us the video data in the form of a promise. If I jump back to the API website, I've found out that there's a hidden website. If you go to the standard game directory right here, which is where we were getting the line_.json file, and then you can't actually see it, but there's a folder in here called media. So if we change the URL and do media/mobile.xml, then what we get here is a list of media content. And if I collapse this, we'll see there's a lot of thumbnails and URLs and things like that. But what I'm interested in are these media tags, which have a type of video. And if we look in them, they have a text blurb explaining what the video is about, and they have some thumbnails, and eventually they have some actual video files. So I want to grab those video files so that I can play them in the video screen. So back in the code, it's going to be very similar to the getGameData URL. So I will copy this line of code that constructs the URL. However, instead of line_.json, it's going to be media/mobile.xml. And unfortunately, it's XML, so we will need to use the XML parser, which makes things a little bit more complicated, but it's not too bad. So now we will return fetch URL.then function response. And since it's XML, we'll need to return response.text rather than response.json. Then another then with the text. And now we need to parse the XML, which we have our parse XML function here, so we can return MLB GameDay API.parse XML and supply the text. And finally, one more then statement, which now has our data. Inside of our data function, we want to get all of the media elements, so we'll say var media equals data.getElements by tag name, and we'll supply media there. And I haven't actually found any, but I'm guessing that it's possible to have a media tag that has a type that's not video. So I do want to filter out all of the media types that don't have a type of video. So what I'm going to do here is I will say media equals media.filter function m, and we'll only return the ones that have a attributes of type equal to video. And just for testing purposes, why don't we just grab the ID of each media element and return that from our function, just to make sure that we're getting the data correctly, and then later on we can go in and actually dig through here and get the video files that we want. So I'm going to create an array called IDs, and we'll say media.map function m. So we're going to map each media element to an ID. So we will return media.attributes ID. And finally, we want to return that data in the form of a promise, so we will return promise.resolve IDs. Now we need a way to test out our API, so let's come back to the game screen, and here's where we are navigating to the video screen. And what we'd like to do is actually pass in some extra information about that particular game. So I think we should try to pass in the item that we have access to. So here's where we're creating the button and render subtitle, and that doesn't have access to the item. So let's give that access to the item by adding it as an argument there. And then down here where we actually render the subtitle, let's pass in the item. And now we need to pass that item information on to the onVideosPress. And the navigate function takes two arguments. One is the path to the screen that we want to go to, and the second is an object containing data. So let's give it an item, which means that this function also needs the item. And so we will say on press here, we'll call this.onVideoPress and pass in the item. So there's a lot of passing around of information, but essentially when we render the list item, we pass on the item to the subtitle function. The subtitle function creates a button for viewing the videos and passes the item into the onPress function there. And then the onVideosPress button function passes that item information through our navigation parameters. And so now we should have access to items in our video screen. In our video screen, we're going to create a constructor here. And this is where we will grab the parameter that we passed in. So we'll create a variable called item, and we can use the this.props.navigation.getParam function to get the item param. And it also takes a second argument with a fallback in case that parameter doesn't exist. So if item for some reason didn't exist, then we'll just set item here to a blank object. And we'll console.log that item to make sure that everything got passed in correctly. So I'll go to this screen, and here we have our item information passed into the video screen. All right, let's store the item to our class as a member variable so we can access it in other functions. And one problem we're going to have is if we take a look at the information here, we don't actually have the game URL. We have the key, which happens to be the same as the game URL, but we don't want to rely on that because in the future we may change our key. So we're going to need to update this information to also include the URL so that we can access it in our video screen. So we're going to go back to the API and find where we set that data, which was right here. We set the key to the game URL, and let's also add a parameter here called URL, which is also the game URL. And this was in our getGameData function where we parsed the linescore.json file, and it's where we grabbed the current score, the name of the teams, how many wins and losses they have, and all of that. So now we're adding the URL property, which is part of our item in the game screen that eventually gets passed to the video screen. So now we should have access to the URL so we can call our new function that we created, getVideoData. So let's do that in the component didMount function. And before we can call it, we need to import the MLB GameDay API. So let's import MLB GameDay API from API/MLB GameDay API. And now we will call MLB GameDay API.getVideoData, and we'll pass in this.item.url, and that is a promise, so we can say .then function data. And for now, let's just console.log the data to make sure that we got everything correctly. So I will save and refresh, and we'll go to our video screen. It looks like we got a warning that says unhandled promise rejection. Okay, the problem here is due to a bug in the API function we created here. We're trying to access media.attributesID when it should actually be m.attributesID. So I will fix that, save and refresh, and now let's go into our video screen and see how that looks. So I'll pull open the console, and here we have an array of numbers that appear to be media IDs, so I think everything is working correctly. The next thing we want to do is save that information in our class's state. So let's create a state here. And we're going to create an isLoading function like we did in the game screen. And we're also going to have a videos variable, which is going to be an array of video data. And I'll just call it actually video data. Okay, so let's make a new function here called get video data. And just like in the game screen, we're going to have it call this.setState is loading equal to true. And then we will call the API here. And once we've received the data, we'll call this.setState is loading false. And we will also assign video data to the data that we've received. So we'll say this.setState video data is equal to data. And in our component mount now, we will call this.get video data. All right, let's go ahead and add our activity indicator to just demonstrate when we are loading. And we'll update our render function now to be a little bit more complex. We're going to surround everything in a view. And up here, we'll just put a clause that says if this.state that is loading, then we're going to return an activity indicator with the animating property set to true, and a style, well, let's set a size equal to large, and a style equal to padding top of 20. And finally, we can't forget, if we're going to access this in our callback function, we need to bind the function to this, so I'll add a .bind this right here. Now let's create a function to render our video data. So I'll create a function here called render video data. And we'll call that function in our main render function, this.render video data. And it won't look good, but let's just return a text element that has this.state.video data, just to make sure that all of the data is there, and we'll come back and clean that up later once we actually have our full amount of video data. So I'll save and refresh, navigate to the videos screen, and they're all jumbled together, but it looks like that's the list of video data IDs that we created. So that's the end for this video. I just wanted to demonstrate how to pass information through navigation parameters. And in the next video, we will start displaying these videos and learning how to play them. Thanks for watching.